This is History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians Thornton Kennedy and James Ottley.
Welcome to History for Cocktail Parties. We are thrilled to be recording at least half of this episode live at the Kiwanis Club of Atlanta and the Loudermuck Center in downtown Atlanta. I'm Thornton Kennedy, here with a co-host,
James Ottley.
How are we doing today, James?
Doing great, man. Hope you are.
I'm doing great, and we both have connections to this Kiwanis Club.
We sure do.
But both past presidents.
That's right.
So it's nice to have a home game and to be doing it live in front of a live studio audience.
You got that right.
And speaking of, what are you thankful for this year, James?
Man, I'm thankful for my family and, in particular, my tireless and patient girlfriend, Katie. I mean, as you might imagine, I talk history 24/7, and she is always interested in it. Or she's a really good actor, one of the two, but I think she's actually interested.
Me, I'm just thankful to live in a country that has a highly functional government.
Laugh track.
We are going to share some history that might make for interesting cocktail fodder as you sit around with friends and families this week. We're not going to do a signature cocktail because we're live, but I recommend a nice Pinot Noir for today's episode. So as you're sitting and listening to it, maybe sip a glass of wine. And let me just say, we are dropping this episode in the middle of our series on the Great Locomotive Chase.
Right. This isn't another Panama Canal number five.
Thank you. The Great Locomotive Chase is a cliffhanger, and we will get back to the ultimate moment in that story in our next episode, which will drop next Thursday. As we get started, I always like to say a few words about one of our supporters, Play. History is full of lessons learned, and one of the big ones is that those who don't take action get run over by those who do. Play is a full-service ad agency and helps brands find their spark or reignite it. Their team of creative players turns bold ideas into action with smart strategy, design, and digital know-how, helping new businesses launch strong and established ones move forward with fresh energy. Ready to grow your business? Get a free Play marketing consultation today at goplaydesign.com. That's goplaydesign.com. James, where do we start our voyage across the North Atlantic?
Let's do it. Well, first of all, a lot of people think of the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock as kind of the archetypal origin story of our country. They sailed over on the Mayflower with their funny hats and their big belt buckles, seeking religious freedom. They got blown off course, the story goes. They first sighted land at Plymouth Rock and chopped down a virgin forest to eke out a living. And most importantly, they had a hearty feast with Squanto about this time of year with his merry tribe of Native Americans. I mean, it is a great origin story. The first settlers of this land, how wholesome and pure and, gosh darn it, American, But, why wouldn't we think of it as the archetypal, origin story? Most textbooks devote 50% more space to the Pilgrims than they do to Virginia or the English colony of Newfoundland, which a lot of people don't know about. I mean, just for example, we all know the name of the ship that brought the Pilgrims, the Mayflower. But does anybody know the three ships that brought the English to Jamestown? Most people don't. They're the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, just in case you were wondering.
I was.
Yeah. But the Pilgrims were by no means the first, settlers here. The first non-native settlers in the country we know as the United States were actually African slaves that were abandoned and left in South Carolina in 1526 by the Spanish.
Wow.
Yeah, abandoned settlement there. This was even before they massacred the French Protestants in 1565 and started St. Augustine, long before that. And in fact, our Pilgrims were not even the first religious pilgrims, for this matter. The Spanish settlers were probably the first religious pilgrims. It was probably Spanish Jews, actually, who settled in New Mexico in the late 1500s and, sought religious freedom. Remember, Spain covered and owned 1/3 of the United States, San Francisco to Florida, a lot longer than it was ever American. And, it was actually the Spanish who were the real cowboys, or the first cowboys. They introduced horses and the rodeo, So jumping back to our Pilgrims for a second, why were the Native Americans so friendly and helpful to the Pilgrims? I mean, it's the real reason is kind of grim. In 1617, before the Pilgrims actually landed, there was a pandemic that swept southern New England. very devastating. For decades, the French, had been fishing and the English had been fishing off the Massachusetts coast, and they'd go ashore for firewood or for fresh water.
It's so funny because you don't hear about that.
You don't.
That there were actually people fishing the waters off of North America long before we settled the continent.
Exactly. And unfortunately, they brought European diseases, and those diseases spread. They wiped out, there was a plague that really made the Black Death of Europe look pretty mild.
Yeah, I heard as much as 90% of some peoples were wiped out by those diseases.
Absolutely. And
just because they had never been exposed to them before.
Yeah, exactly. 1 in 20 Native Americans in that area, were wiped out. So, a lot of the survivors of this plague abandoned their villages. They often fled to a neighboring tribe. The English thought this was a message from God. In 1634, Massachusetts Bay Colony John Winthrop said, God hath cleared title to this place for us. He's wiped out the Native Americans for 300 miles. So that was their, kind of grim interpretation of it. And, some authors or historians say that the epidemic probably constituted the most important geopolitical event of the early 17th century.
And nobody knows that.
Yeah.
No one really knows how important that plague was in terms of establishing the United States of America.
Maybe the most important event in the history of America. Maybe.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. For, in New England, the English settlers they didn't face any, real hostile, Indian presence for 50 years.
Right.
And it's
and there were villages already set up on the coast.
Absolutely.
There were already little areas for them to live in that had fields for crops and
exactly. And nobody, a lot of people don't know this, and so, this unfortunately, this plague and these populations being wiped out probably prompted the legendary warm reception that we do know about for Squanto, the Wampanoags. They were probably eager to ally with the English because, they were fearful of other tribes. For example, Squanto was probably fearful that the Narragansetts to the west were going to come attack him. And so
I always heard that the Pilgrims actually encountered some resistance when they got here.
There was a first encounter. I think it's labeled as the first encounter. They were first harbored at Provincetown, but then packed up from there. But I think they brought it on themselves, actually.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think
they moved into someone else's village and they decided that you were
and fired first.
Oh, there you go.
So the native populations, by the time they were able to replenish themselves, it was too late to, expel the intruders. And, they probably would not have been so friendly had they had the numbers to do it. The Native Americans had driven off Champlain when he had tried to settle Massachusetts in 1606. And in 1607, a tribe had helped expel the first Plymouth colony, which had attempted settlement in Maine. So, I think that epidemic really made a huge difference.
It did. Absolutely.
So I mentioned that, most Americans know about the iconic Mayflower, but did you know there was actually a second ship that left England with the Mayflower to cover these?
I did not know that. I even watched the documentary on the Pilgrims for this episode, and they do not mention
how many ships? One ship,
One
right?
ship. It's always the Mayflower.
And did you know that the Pilgrims actually left from Holland rather than England? The Pilgrims were originally from Nottinghamshire, England. But when they decided to actually make the move to North America, they were living in Holland. When they were originally in England, they were in Nottingham, and they were practicing, we do know this part, their Puritan form of Protestantism, and they were considered illegal radicals, you know? And when they learned that the authorities were on to them, they fled in the night to Leyden, Holland. And Leyden was known for supporting Reformed churches, and it was a much sought-after destination for illegal radicals like our Pilgrims.
They were extreme.
Yeah, it was extreme for sure in that time. But they were in Holland. Life, started to become difficult for them. They had to take menial jobs, and even worse, their children started taking on the customs of the
real
Dutch.
Screw up here is that they start to become Dutch. Yeah. That is completely unacceptable.
Exactly. So
next thing you know, they're smoking pot. They're hanging out in Amsterdam.
Those Dutch, man.
It's the Dutch, man.
But to make matters worse, James I then entered an alliance with Holland against Spain, and one of the conditions was Holland outlawing independent churches like this. So, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin. And in fact, actually, the English authorities came to arrest their leader, William Brewster, in 1618. So they really they'd had enough. So they got a charter from the Plymouth colony. They got funding, actually investment from the Merchants Adventurers. I never knew that either.
No, I didn't know that either.
And so they planned to cross the Atlantic using these two ships. The first was a small ship, the Speedwell, that was going to carry them to England from Holland, and then they would rendezvous with the larger ship, the 106-foot Mayflower. But then both ships would be used to cross the Atlantic to get to the New World. Trip to England took them from Holland, took them 3 days. They anchored in Southampton, and they waited for the Mayflower. Mayflower left London around mid-July 1620, carrying about 65 passengers. Interestingly, they were going to join the Pilgrims, but interestingly, these were not Pilgrims. These were just ordinary folks who were, hoping for a new life for themselves and also to maybe try and make a buck or two in the New World. So both ships, they planned to depart for the Americas by end of July, but a leak was discovered in the Speedwell. So sad. And so they had to go back. The repair delayed them till August 5th. So on August 5th, 1620, the Mayflower and the Speedwell gloriously set sail with hope and promise to the New World.
Not so fast, my friend.
Not so fast. So the Speedwell sprang another leak. And both
Of
ships,
course it did.
Yeah. And so both trips.
What is wrong with this ship?
A lot.
There's some little dude down in there just drilling holes in the side of it. This guy does not want to go across the North Atlantic.
They did accuse the crew of sabotage. But I'm going to get to that. So both ships, they returned to Dartmouth so the Speedwell could be repaired. After the repairs are made, the Mayflower and the Speedwell, again, they set sail from Dartmouth, filled with hope, promise, looking forward to the New World, until the Speedwell developed a third leak. Third time was not the charm. So they finally determined that it took them a while, I guess, that Speedwell wasn't going to make it. So they put some of the passengers from some of the Pilgrims from the Speedwell onto the Mayflower. They crammed in there. The others returned to Holland. And like I said, some people suggest that the crew had actually sabotaged the voyage there. They waited 7 more days till the wind picked up, and then the Mayflower finally departed Plymouth, England, September 6, 1620. There were 102 passengers, approximately 30 crew, and 1 death occurred on the voyage, a man by the name of William Button.
And there was also 1 damn near death.
Yes.
As you said, the Mayflower leaves in September 1620. It sails across the Atlantic in September, October, and November. I've never done it. I don't know, but they're sailing against the wind, really choppy waters. As you said, it's a big boat, but it's really not that big. 102 people crammed into about 1,500 square feet.
Yeah.
No bathrooms, no latrines, no windows. They're sheep, they're chickens, they're dogs.
It just sounds terrible.
No showers, bathing, absolutely miserable. Meanwhile, you've got this ship rocking back and forth and back and forth. During a particularly rough patch, this indentured servant named John Howland goes up on deck for some fresh air. And as he's up on deck, the ship pitches violently and tosses him over the side. He falls into the North Atlantic. Everybody sees him. He keeps going under the waves and coming back up again. It's a death sentence.
Yeah,
There's no way you're surviving that. Somehow, John Howland manages to grab onto a rope.
It's impressive.
And they grab him. They get him back up on the boat, and he survives. It's a miracle.
It is a miracle.
Yeah, but that's not the end of the story.
Let's hear it.
In America, Holland works off his indentured. He marries a woman named Elizabeth Tilley, who bore him 10 children. Those 10 begat 88. And from those, an estimated 2 million Americans descended.
That is an incredible number.
Including both President Bush's, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Humphrey Bogart. I think that's where the myth of the Pilgrims founding America came from.
Yeah,
they were quite prolific.
You talked about these violent storms and the ship pitching. That was part of the, I'm going to say the Thanksgiving myth, but that is part of the official story, that there were violent storms or maybe it was a navigation error. They were blown off course. And when they first sighted land, it was Cape Cod, and it was already November, right? And they were worried about winter, so they dropped anchor there, and that's how they chose, Cape Cod. But they were actually, headed somewhere else. Well, where were they headed? And Then
weren't there like 4 different places that they possibly could have been going?
yeah.
How do we not know that?
Some sources, well, I mean, I think different historians say different things.
Right.
So some historians say that they had gotten a charter to colonize at the mouth of the Hudson River, south of Dutch New Amsterdam, which was now New
Would
York
make
City.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
And they had gotten the charter, and that's where they originally were headed. Other textbooks say that they were headed to Virginia to be near an existing or join an existing English colony. The Pilgrims were only about 35 of the 100 or 102
Right.
settlers on the
That's
ship.
overview.
Yeah, and the rest were just ordinary folks seeking to, hopefully make a fortune.
Like John Howland, the indentured servant.
Absolutely. The other folks, these non-Pilgrims, had joined the expedition seeking economic opportunity. And they were pretty ticked off when the boat went to Cape Cod. In fact, they almost mutinied. We have evidence or reports of that as well. So that's pretty good evidence that at least the non-Pilgrims, these 65 ordinary folks, certainly did not intend to go to Cape Cod or to stop in Cape Cod. But what about the 35 Pilgrims themselves? It's kind of interesting to kind of dig into that. Where did they want to go, and were they really off course? It's kind of interesting. I was reading this one article where they talk about navigation there. That doesn't really hold water, so to speak, because one parameter that these navigators did know how to the sailors did know how to navigate was that they knew how to accurately measure, where the latitude was, so the distance north and south of the equator. So they knew how to navigate that. And, there probably were storms, but, once the storms, subsided, they could easily have sailed south to the Virginia colony or, somewhere else.
They've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not just accidentally get blown off course by a storm.
Right, yeah. So what happened? Some say or posit that believe that the Dutch actually bribed the captain of the Mayflower to sail south to Cape Cod so the Pilgrims would not settle near New Amsterdam. It'd be completely far away from them. Another thing that's kind of interesting, if the Pilgrims were so worried about winter approaching and setting up shop at the first sight of land, why did they spend 6 weeks until December 26th scouting around Cape Cod looking for the best spot? Why didn't they just start building their colony right away? One historian, Professor James Lowen, history professor at the University of Vermont, believes they might have been intending, at least the Pilgrims, have been intending to settle in Cape Cod the whole time, that they didn't want to be, any form of Anglican control. They certainly wouldn't have wanted to go to Jamestown or to a Virginia colony. And
so did the Pilgrims bribe the captain?
Well,
where did they get money?
I don't think they bribed them, but, he goes on to say that, they were not fond of Dutch culture. So they certainly didn't want to go to near New Amsterdam. And, it's interesting. The Pilgrims actually already knew quite a bit about what Massachusetts could offer them. They were really familiar with the topography. They had recent maps that had been drawn by Champlain when he investigated the area in 1606. And even Captain John Smith who named New England, offered to guide the Pilgrims to Cape Cod. He was too expensive, so they took his guidebook instead, Squanto, they say maybe he was even, sent as an advanced man. I know we'll get to Squanto.
I was going to say, it's a great story.
But so there are all these reasons that make people think, well, maybe the Pilgrims, maybe that part of the story about being blown off course or navigation error isn't actually true. The Pilgrims wanted to go there the whole time. And you ask about, well, they couldn't bribe them. One historian goes so far as to suggest that the Pilgrims actually hijacked the boat.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, hijacked the ship and forced the landing at Cape Cod.
I sincerely doubt that. These were men of God. There was certainly against their code.
Yeah, but maybe God directed them. I don't know. Anyway.
to take over a ship.
Yeah, exactly. We may never know whether they were off course, like the story says, or whether they were intending to go there all along. Last thing on that, there's a myth about them also coming in and chopping down the trees and really just having to scratch out an existence, eke out a living here. With this with the pandemic, which we talked about, a lot of this area was already cleared by the Native Americans, that were here, and Like some of the journals even say that Plymouth was, beautifully cleared fields, recently planted with corn, useful harbor, that this was the perfect site for a village because there had been a village there.
Right.
They kind of just walked into a pretty good situation without having to clear all this land themselves.
So why did they struggle so mightily in that first period?
Well, I don't know that they struggled as much as we thought they did.
Oh, so that's a myth too?
Well, I mean, from my research, they were, they actually took some corn, from.
Yeah, that's what I read. They had stolen corn from the.
Yeah. So, I mean, they certainly got a lot of help from the Wampanoags, and
so the night that original winter is part of the mythology. Surviving this hard winter and then having the Thanksgiving in 1621.
I'm not saying that it's that part's truly myth, but I don't know that it was as bad as they said it was, just based on the fact that they didn't have to expend a lot of labor on chopping down trees and clearing fields because the fields were already there. Some of the corn, they was stored and they were able to get to it. So no, I'm not going to go on record of saying that part was a myth for sure, but.
Terrific. Well, that is where we're going to have to leave it. If y'all want to hear the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey liked to say, you'll have to download the episode, and we're going to record the rest of it this afternoon and drop it tomorrow morning. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the Kiwanis Club of Atlanta having us today, and we really appreciate it. And
thanks again. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Seacrest Pritchard. Sterling Seacrest Pritchard is one of the Southeast's largest privately held insurance brokers and quite possibly the only agency brave enough to tackle everything from construction mishaps to healthcare misadventures, logistics disasters, real estate whoopsies, and even ransom notes from hackers who apparently never heard of two-factor authentication. When it comes to your home, your business, and all the weirdness life can throw your way, SSP has you covered, usually before you even realize you need it. For a friendly guide through, wait, that can actually happen? To, do I need a lawyer? Just call 678-424-6503 or visit sspins.com. That's sspins.com.
And we appreciate SSP's support. Always great to have them as a partner with our program.
Indeed.
And so finally, we arrive at the first story of Thanksgiving. And this starts with a group we've already discussed, the Wampanoag people, who had lived in the area that is Massachusetts and Rhode Island for more than 10,000 years. This includes Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. The name translates to people of light.
Come on.
It does. However, early encounters with European fishermen, as we said earlier, those waters had been fished by Europeans before the Pilgrims ever arrived.
That's right.
Before the folks that we credit with the founding of America arrived. The interactions with those fishermen had decimated the tribe's numbers. So as many as 50 to 90% of those peoples perished.
Right. They didn't have immunity.
It was a disaster. When these colonists arrive in Plymouth, the Wampanoag see this as an opportunity. They have rival tribes all around them. And so their chief, Massasoit, decides to enter into a peace agreement with these guys. They form a partnership. The story is that first winter is brutal, and they have to steal corn.
I think they wouldn't have even survived had it not been for the help of, the Massasoit.
That's the story. And we do know that as many as 50 of those original voyagers do not survive that first winter.
Yeah.
And so Massasoit takes pity on them, and he allows one of their people, a gentleman named Squanto, to live in their village. And Squanto knows how to cultivate beans and squash, and he teaches them how to plant the fields. As we said, there were villages already all along the coast, so there were areas to be cultivated. Squanto teaches them these skills, and they are shocked. Not only does Massasoit speak English, but Squanto speaks English as well.
And I'll tell you why Squanto speaks English.
Please do.
He's actually crossed the Atlantic more than you and I have, believe it or not. Although not by choice. In around 1605, an English captain kidnapped Squanto and actually 4 other Native Americans and took him to England. And he spent 9 years, Squanto did, in England, 3 of them working for this other captain and then the rest, I don't know what he was doing. I don't know if he was an indentured servant or not. After 9 years, Ferdinando Gorges, who we mentioned earlier, actually helped Squanto arrange passage back to Massachusetts in 1614 with Captain John Smith.
Unreal.
But he was promptly kidnapped again in 1614. The year he got back, when an English slave raider seized Squanto, 24 fellow Indians, and sold them into slavery in Spain. And Squanto's a pretty amazing guy, kind of a Ulysses, if you will. He escaped from slavery in Spain, then escaped from Spain, made his way back to England. And in 1619, he talked to an English sea captain to get him back to Cape Cod in Massachusetts. That's where he learned English. He probably knew Spanish as well, multilingual,
Incredible.
And, it's funny, when you're talking about the cooperation from Massasoit, he actually sent another Native American Indian, one part of his tribe, Hobomok, who we don't hear as much about.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
Live among the Pilgrims as a guide and an ambassador. And it was actually Hobomok who set them up in the fur trade and helped them establish fur trading posts at the mouth of the Penobscot and Kennebec rivers in Maine, and also in other parts of Massachusetts and what is now Windsor, Connecticut. So they were very, very helpful to these, to these pilgrims. And in short, I mean, if it weren't for Squanto and the Wampanoags, they wouldn't have survived.
I agree. And this gets to the story of that first Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving that is taught in kindergartens and that we sort of hearken back to. There was a gentleman named William Bradford who was the first governor of Plymouth. And much of what we know about the Pilgrims is taken from something he wrote, which is called On Plymouth Plantation. And it does include a passage about the bounty that they had heading into that second winter. As we mentioned, the first winter was just brutal. A lot of people died. As that second winter approaches, they have a surplus of goods, thanks largely to Squanto.
Absolutely.
And to
Hobomok.
William Bradford makes mention of this bounty. He takes copious notes, but he does not mention this celebration, this feast. However, another pilgrim named Edward Winslow does. And I'm going to read to you where the origin story comes from. He wrote this to a friend in 1621. Quote, "We set the last spring some 20 acres of Indian corn and sowed some 6 acres of barley and peas. And according to the manner of Indians, we manured our ground with herrings, which we have in great abundance. Our corn did prove well, and God be praised, we had a good increase of Indian corn. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might, after a more special manner, rejoice together. After we had gathered the fruit of our labors, at which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming among us, and amongst the rest of their greatest King Massasoit, with some 90 men, for whom 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others." So that 3 days of feast.
You sure you don't want to read the rest of the chapter? It's just a long quote there. But anyway,
I forgot to finish with a quote.
Oh, great. Yeah.
No, it's end quote. And that, my friends, is the only firsthand account of what we recognize with the big hats and the belt buckles, the pilgrims celebrating with the natives. It's
the turkeys and all of it.
It is just in Edward Winslow's letter that he wrote to a friend and doesn't appear anywhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I've actually got a few more little nuggets about our famous and iconic Thanksgiving celebration and our iconic pilgrims.
You don't say, James.
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Shocking.
Yeah, matter of fact, I do. So Plymouth Rock, it's it's like a shrine
right
now, but it was not this celebrated iconic place until about 1880.
Really?
Yeah. And apparently there was some enterprising townfolk of Plymouth who got the idea. I don't know if it was a tourist thing or maybe, So they rejoined the two pieces of the rock on the waterfront. They built the Greek temple. I don't know if you've ever been to it.
No,
I actually have, but I didn't.
Of course you have.
Of course I have. And
how did you wait till this long to tell
drop
us
that little nugget?
Plymouth Rock?
Don't want to show off. But when I was there, I did not realize the crack right down the middle of the rock. And I didn't know really until I was doing research for this podcast that it had split in two.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, like the Liberty Bell, right? I mean, it's almost split in. It did split in two, but it had a crack. And yeah, apparently in 1774, the Patriots, American Revolution, they're like, well, we let's protect this, so they brought it into the town square, but they left half the rock on the beach. I mean,
may I ask a stupid question?
Well, hopefully I can answer it. If I can't,
how big is the rock?
It's not that big.
Okay.
Look, I mean, it's really, I mean, I don't say it could pick it up, but I mean, it's really not that big. It's surprisingly small.
I don't know why, but I really thought it was bigger.
Yeah, you'd think so. You'd think it'd be this massive,
absolutely
massive structure.
Something you could see from 100 miles off 100
miles. No. Look at it. It is crazy how small it is. So
we'll put a picture of it in the show notes.
That's a great idea. So they put it back together, and that was in 1880, and in 1774, when the Patriots, when they moved it into town, they didn't even bother to move the second half of the rock, or the smaller piece of the rock, and it stayed on the beach for 100 years.
Oh wow!
Yeah, in 1880 they finally glued it back together.
Well, let me add that in the 1880s, where we are now, Atlanta started having these big expositions, and we started like promoting ourselves to these big groups. So it would make a certain amount of sense that they would start to sort of, make this tourist attraction at the same time to bring people into their little town,
or keep them from coming south to the New South, to Atlanta. Yeah, that is actually a pretty brilliant insight.
We've got stuff here.
That's
don't
right.
need to go down to Atlanta to
exactly,
see things.
Or bypass us down to Florida.
We have things too.
Indeed. That's exactly right. So, and it's funny, the modern celebration that we know as, now as Thanksgiving, it only dates back to 1863. It was started during the Civil War.
So 200 years plus later. 1621.
Oh, right. I thought you were going back from 2025.
No, your brain was broken from
okay. I didn't know if you were doing Georgia
James
math.
Gave me a look like he was like, man, I don't know what they teach at Belmont Abbey College, but
math apparently is not it. No, okay, I misunderstood. But so for political reasons, Abraham Lincoln made it a national holiday because they needed all the unions, all the patriotism that they could get at that time, and just kind of and it's funny. At the time, in 1863, the Pilgrims and their story wasn't even included in the tradition. They didn't make it into the story or the tradition until the 1890s. And actually, they weren't even known as Pilgrims, referred to as Pilgrims until the 1870s. And another kind of funny thing. So jumping back a second, George Washington did declare it a proclamation, a national day of Thanksgiving or whatnot, but not a federal holiday in 1789. But many presidents after that, up until Lincoln, did not make a proclamation like that. And I did find out, my research indicates that by the 1840s or so, most northern states did have some type of recognition and celebration of Thanksgiving. But the southern states at that time did not. They thought it was a Yankee thing, and they weren't going to have any part of it.
I got to say, man, there is something very New England about Thanksgiving.
Good point. And that kind of leads me, we've talked about how the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock, I mean, it really is the archetypal origin story of our country. I mean, it's so quaint, it's so perfect, so pure, wholesome, all those good things.
They survived the winter, just good old-fashioned.
And the friendship of the Native Americans, all of it. And
share our bounty.
But, the Virginia colony was here, a decade or more before they showed up. So why didn't
Jamestown get the credit?
Exactly. Well, the optics weren't as good. I mean, they still aren't. The kind of the research I've done, this is kind of in the realm of some of the overlooked history of colonial Virginia, is some pretty grim details. According to one historian, the early English colonies and the Virginia colony, they were known for engaging in bickering and sloth and even cannibalism. If you can believe it. Again, according to one historian. This same historian goes on to say that in the early days of the Jamestown or British Virginia colony, these colonists would spend their time just sitting around digging random holes in the ground, haplessly looking for gold instead of planting crops, and because of this, they had, experienced starvation and they had to resort to digging up, Native Americans' crops and or renting themselves out to to American Indians, Native Americans.
Wow.
To their families as servants, So
that's very different.
Yeah, it is very different than the Pilgrim story, right? And so if all of this is true, it's pretty easy to see why the Pilgrims and Plymouth Rock are, America's archetypal origin story.
Absolutely. So we thank you for listening. This has been a great episode on Thanksgiving. Thank you, James, for all of your research.
Right on.
And thank you to the Kiwanis Club of Atlanta for letting us do our spiel in front of you. And a quick word of advice as you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table with folks giving thanks. Just remember, one thing everyone can agree on is a podcast, and maybe share some details of your favorite podcast, which we hope History for Cocktail Parties lands on your list somewhere.
Indeed.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your families.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for listening. This is History for Cocktail Parties with hack historians Thornton Kennedy and James Ottley.